Okay, Martin, could I just get your confirmation that the recording started there? Wonderful, thanks very much. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us today, everyone, from all different parts of the UK. We've got a really interesting agenda today about getting involved in your local cycle and walking infrastructure plan. And I'm pleased to welcome two speakers today from Sustrans and from Active Travel England. I shall introduce those shortly. I just want to take the opportunity before we get going just to say a little bit more about some things that are coming up, dates for your diary. On the 24th of October, we're going to have another webinar in this format where we're going to be welcoming Roger French from Bus and Train User Blogger fame, ex-head of Brighton and Hove buses down in Sussex, and he's going to be doing a webinar for us about building relationships with your local bus company and developing the links between rail and bus. In November, we've got another one of our 2-monthly integrated sustainable travel discussion groups, and we're going to be doing a focus on working with colleges and universities. Just getting speakers confirmed for that, but we're hoping to welcome some external speakers and also some of our Community Rail Network members who are already doing some work with students from colleges and universities. So that should be really informative. If you'd like to be invited to join that, if you're not already on my mailing list, then please just get in contact with me. And in January, just sorting the details at the moment, but going to have a really exciting webinar focused on using mobile phone data in helping planning travel integration projects. That's going to be a speaker from Network Rail joining us for that. Really exciting opportunity, I think, there that I'm looking forward to digging into a little bit deeper about the sort of data that's available, scary amounts of data, to be honest with you, about people's travel to and from stations, first and last mile journeys, and about how we can use those to inform our projects. So more details about that later, and keep your eye on the CRN website for that. And I should also just advertise the fact that you can catch up on all these webinars, previous ones, including our Integrated Sustainable Transport Fund showcase events, and also a really informative webinar about bus service improvement plans. If you want to find those, just check out the Members Services Index, past event materials, and you'll find what you're looking for. And also, just before we get started, I want to say a very special thanks to the Foundation for Integrated Transport, who are funding my position at CRN at the moment, up until towards the end of the year. So thank you to them for their support. And anybody watching this video after the event, please do get in contact if you've got any ideas, suggestions, projects that you're planning that I might be able to support you with. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. Kevin McCann is joining us from Sustrans and Nick Chamberlain from Active Travel England to tell us more about local cycle walking infrastructure plans, how you can get involved, influence on an ongoing basis. So I shall, with pleasure, pass over to Kevin.
Thanks very much, Gary. Morning, everyone. I'm just going to try and share my screen, and I've got a few slides prepared. So give me a second. They should hopefully pop up. And are you able to just give me a thumbs up, Gary, if they're on screen? Brilliant. Excellent. Okay. Yeah, morning, everyone. So I'm Kevin. I'm from Sustrans. I've been at Sustrans for about 8 years, and for about 7 of those years, I've been involved in one way or another, working in or about LCWIPs, local cycling and walking infrastructure plans. And what I'm going to do for about the next 15 or 20 minutes is give you a bit of an overview of the kind of policy background, where LCWIPs came from, how long they've been around, how LCWIPs are actually created, give you some examples, neither good or bad. I'm agnostic on whether they're good or bad. You can judge for yourself. And then questions. I think we're going to save questions for the end after Nick's presentation. But yeah, that's the plan. Bit of policy background. Apologies for the text. I will whiz through this. It's worth bearing in mind that these have been going since 2017, so there's a lot of water passed under the bridge. There's been a lot of lines drawn on maps. I'm not going to go into detail about every line on every map. This is a potted history of LCWIPs, but I think it's important just to put them in context of where they came from. So back in 2017, government in the cycling and walking investment strategy had an objective in that strategy to introduce LCWIPs across the country. And it's worth noting that prior to 2017, there wasn't a consistent approach that local authorities could use that defined how you should develop your cycling and walking network, which in itself is quite interesting, I think. So it's the first time to try and bring some consistency in how networks were developed. One of the biggest reasons for that is because um, if networks were left, without guidance, we've seen many examples of infrastructure that gets put in place because it's either opportunistic, um, it's easy, the quick wins, um, it dodges the, well, where's the difficult stuff that needs to be done. And I think what LSWIPs have done is try to, in the most simplest sense, identify where people are and where people need to go, and let's draw a line between that, and that's where we need to provide our infrastructure. So that was back in 2017, and the methodology for LSWIPs, which I'll talk about shortly, has stood the test of time. So 7 years later, we've been through a number of different governments and a few different strategies, but LSWIPs and the methodology are still existing, and it's something that, as I'm sure Nick will allude to in shortly, that Active Travel England look to when they're trying to sort of rank authority on their capability skills. Do you have a network plan in place? So that's where they come from. The outputs of an LSWIP is really simple. It's a map with lines on it suggesting where your infrastructure needs to go. That's as simple as I can boil it down to. Alongside the map, you need to provide a prioritized list of improvements. So you're going to try and recognize what's the short, medium, long-term aspirations, and then all of the kind of analysis that supports that needs to exist in the document as well. The outcomes of an LSWIP are essentially to provide a sort of 10-year plan for a local authority or combined authority in terms of what is the network going to look like in the short, medium, and long term. It's essentially developing a strategic pipeline of active travel interventions. So back when the guidance was released in 2017, it was clear in the guidance that they were non-mandatory. LSWIPs are not a mandatory thing. It wasn't DFT saying to every local authority, you have to go and do this. However, this line in bold was really obvious. I think local authorities who have plans will be well placed to make the case for future investment. I think many authorities, even though they weren't mandatory, sort of saw the mood music and thought that's where we're going. If we're going to be successful in securing funding, we need to develop a network that follows a consistent methodology. And there we are. So back in 2017, DFT hosted a competition that local authorities could bid into to get some support in developing an LSWIP. And there were, oh, have I missed a slide? Yes, here we are. Sorry, it's just the wrong way around. You could bid into DFT for some revenue support to help develop your LSWIP, and that's the list of 46. Since then, since 2017, 2018, I would say almost every local authority across England has developed an LSWIP in one form or another, and we'll look at that in a little while. So what is an LSWIP in terms of how does the guidance illustrate a methodology of how to develop the plan? That's what I want to touch on very briefly. So it's a six-stage plan. The first stage is essentially to decide the geographic extent of the plan. So, for example, who's going to own the plan? Might it be the local authority? Might it be the county council? Might it be the combined authority? And what geographical extent will that cover? Is it going to focus on one single town? Is it going to focus on a collection of towns? Is it going to be region wide? Those are the kind of decisions that get made in stage one. Stage two is all about gathering info. Gary, I heard you mention that mobile phone data webinar in a few months. That would be really interesting because that's what this is all about. Essentially, it's how much data is out there that gives an indication of the ways in which people travel. So It's identifying trip generators, etc. Where are people trying to get to and from? Um, Once you've gathered all that information, they will usually be straight lines on maps, what we call desire lines. Um, they're agnostic to the road network. They don't, identify whether you should go down the A1 or the A2. It's just kind of it's a line on a map. And stage 3 is all about trying to um, ensure those desire lines follow, um, uh, what's possible. Usually the road network could be canal network, etc., etc. Um, there's a stage 4, which is all about planning for walking. We might touch on walking a bit more later. But if we're completely honest, the attempt was to plan for cycling and walking. And history has showed us that the methodology is much, much stronger on cycling and much weaker on walking. We tend to see in LCWIPs a focus on cycling more than walking, which is to the detriment, really. Um, and then stage 5 is all about prioritizing improvement. So you've identified all of these desire lines, corridors, core walking zones, etc. The local authority or whoever is owning the LSWIP then needs to come up with some criteria that basically allows them to prioritize what improvements they're going to hopefully put in place in the short, medium, and long term. The last stage of the method is about integration and application. So that's essentially saying, okay, now we've got this plan. How are we going to deliver it? Where does it fit within our local and regional policies and strategies? I've always argued that it comes too late in the process. This stage 6, it should be done right up at the front at stage 1, or maybe even stage 0. I kind of, if we're going to do this plan, how are we going to deliver it? You kind of need to know that first. But hey ho, we're always learning. So that is the method, the 6-stage method that stood the test of time thus far. I'm going to now give you a couple of examples of working through that method. So just a couple of screenshots of like examples of how it's been done in the past. Any eagle-eyed amongst you might notice this is Liverpool City region. I'm just picking on them because I know it quite well and it's an easy one to do. This is an example of an exercise that would happen at stage 2. So this is the authority gathering data. This is about information gathering. Where are people travelling? And this is done through the PCT tool, propensity to cycle tool, which is essentially using census data that is telling us how are people traveling to work and school. And you could see really, really clearly, it doesn't follow any of the kind of, natural geography, highway lines or anything like that. It is literally desire lines. It's lines on a map that kind of shows a clear north-south direction of travel into the city. You've got a few out into the satellite towns, and then you've got this obvious desire line across the river here, which is incredibly difficult to build cycling infrastructure across a river, believe it or not. So this speaks to that kind of like multimodal journeys that needs to be considered when planning for walking and cycling. This isn't the only way in which you'd gather information. Like Gary touched on earlier, you might be using mobile phone data. There's all sorts of data that you would use, but this is just one example. And start layering up that information. So here's again Liverpool City region, but you've started adding a bit more finesse to those desire lines, that kind of north-south out to the satellite towns, but you're overlaying things like rail stations, bus stations, town centres, future housing developments, future housing sites, making sure that the interventions that you may introduce are actually serving the places that people need to go. That then gets packaged up. Here's a few examples of on the left. This is what the Liverpool City region LSWIP looked like. You can see it's really, really zoomed out. There's hardly any detail about kind of like road detail, highway detail, anything like that. There's no design or anything similar to this one in West Midlands. It's a really, really zoomed out approach that's saying these are the desire lines that we need to focus on and provide interventions for in the future. Once they've done that map, they start to think about how they might prioritize which lines would get delivered first. So again, this is Liverpool City regions. effort. There's all the sort of criteria along the left, so things like access to the bus network, links to the rail network, etc. If lines meet these certain criteria, they'll score higher, which then gets them put into phases of, these are our kind of short-term routes that we'd like to deliver, these are our medium-term routes, and these are the kind of long-term aspirations that might be in the long grass for a little while. But that's how the prioritization is done. I want to show you another example. I've picked on Liverpool City region for this one to show you how an LSWIP's been done when it's been really, really zoomed out and done at a regional scale. So they've tried to do it for the city region. This next one I'm going to show you is West Yorkshire's approach. It's 6 or 7 years old, and they have updated the LSWIP since this example that I'm going to show you. But I think it shows a really neat illustration of two different authorities using the same methodology, but at stage one, having a completely different geographic scope. So Liverpool City region went, right, we're going to go whole region wide. This is our plan for the region. West Yorkshire come along. Anyone who knows West Yorkshire, sorry if it's really small, but these 5 local authorities make up West Yorkshire Combined Authority. This one at sort of 12 to 3 o'clock is Leeds City Council. And West Yorkshire within their LSWIP chose this little square, this area, this is their LSWIP, this is what they've focused on. So they've chosen they've used the same methodology, but the geographic focus has been much more zoomed in, and you'll see the sort of slight difference in outputs. So their desire lines on a much more zoomed in area results in this. So they've gone, here's sort of 10, 11 desire lines, and these 2 red ones are the ones that we're going to focus on. They've then gone into much more detail where they're actually looking at specific lines on a map and going, should this north-south link follow the main road here and be sort of, segregated super highway type cycle infrastructure, or should it follow this sort of quiet way route through the residential areas like this? So real different level from what some other authorities have chosen to do. What zooming in has allowed West Yorkshire to do, and a number of other authorities as well. This isn't me singling out West Yorkshire and saying they've done it right or wrong. But what it does allow them to do is to focus more on walking. I think when you are zooming out and thinking at a regional scale, it's really difficult to pinpoint those kind of walking interventions, which of course we know are so important if we're going to get people active travel, and particularly engaging with bus, rail network, integrated transport, etc. So zooming in allows them to do more on the walking network. So here's an example in Dewsbury. They've identified a core walking network, and it's kind of like, we know that anything in there needs treatment, whether it be better crossing, shorter wait times, drop curbs, accessible crossings, stuff like that. And they've identified some funnels into the town centre in terms of these primary walking routes and the secondary walking routes. Again, by being zoomed in at this scale, it allows them to go, we can actually start to identify interventions here. So for example, over here, we've got Dewsbury train station, and I've identified a couple of streets that lead into the station that they've said this needs some lighting improvement. We might need a drop curve. We might need some activation in the green space that enables people to kind of, use the green space through day and night time as well, and all seasons, and start to put some costs to those interventions on a kind of timescale, either short, medium, or long. I'm going to jump out of this presentation now and stop talking about the method for a moment, and I'm going to talk to you about LSWIP coverage across England. So we worked on a project recently with colleagues at Active Travel England to sort of come up with a baseline of who's done what across the country, and we tried to gather every single LSWIP that was out there in England, and map them onto one layer that gave us a baseline of kind of who's done what. It's really important to say at this point that this is not public facing. at the moment, this data that we've gathered. This was brought together as a internal tool for government to help them take to Treasury for spending review to kind of, give some background on capital asks and stuff like that. But I think what this picture does do is give you a sense of LCWIPs that have been delivered and the typical sort of settlements where you'll find them. So you can see in the kind of bigger city regions, we've got these really quite sorry, it might take a little while for the computer to update, but these really quite sort of dense networks. Here's Greater Manchester, the jewel in the crown of the network that's gone to an incredible amount of detail across a whole region. But you can see the difference between the kind of the city regions of Liverpool, Manchester, Sheffield, etc. Up in the northeast, we've got quite a lot of detail up in Newcastle and surrounding areas, and compare that to counties like Cumbria, where they've not managed to do a full regional LSWIP, but do they need to is a question, and they focused more on the kind of local towns, market towns, etc. So again, it's a question of scale and that decision making from the local authority who own these. Let me see if I can flick back to here, and what else did I have to say? Yeah, I'm going to try and wrap it up quickly now and give Nick some time. I just wanted to point out that LSWIPs themselves are essentially a planning tool. Again, it's about this developing a strategic pipeline of interventions. They are not design documents. They're not intended to go into any sort of detail when it comes to what might these lines on maps look like. That's another stage. That's a stage post LSWIP that people will go into, where you start kind of creating, your visualizations, your more detailed designs that goes into, junction layout, and how might we fit these lines into the actual highway and stuff like that. And it's often a long process. I've worked with colleagues in the past who a few years ago sort of developed some of these designs up, and it's kind of like, when might these get delivered? We don't, it's always a waiting game, but it does happen. A few examples I'm just going to quickly show you. We worked on an LSWIP probably 4 or 5 years ago, and it feels like things move at a glacial pace, but we do get there in the end, and these interventions get built out. But the most important thing is they're being built out in the right place, because we know that's where people need to travel. I think I'll end it there, Gary, if that's all right, and then sort of hand over to Nick and hopefully come back to questions later, unless there's anything in the chat that needs picking up now.
Thanks, Kevin. No, there's been some comments made in the chat. Nick's responded to Ben's post. There is a question from Linda. Have you used disused railways and canals mostly, which there are more in the north?
I don't know if there's a yes or no answer to that, Linda. I would say, well, no. I'm going to say less. LSWIPs are owned by the local authority, and or the combined authority, whoever kind of decides to take it upon themselves. It's on them to decide which type of infrastructure is most appropriate, and it's usually a mix. So if there's disused railways, if there's canals, etc., that lend themselves to where people need to be, then yes, they will be used, I imagine. But it shouldn't be used at the disadvantage of, if the disused railway or greenway, for example, doesn't link you to where you need to be, whether that be the town centre, school, rail station, etc., then it's going to be considered more of a leisure route. The principles of LSWIPs, when it was first set out, was this was about commuting more than leisure. So it's about developing that. Can we get people to work and latterly school? So I don't know if that answers the question fully, but probably less so than just using the highway network.
Thank you, Kevin. That's great. Okay, keep on posting your questions in the chat bar, folks. Some people just putting comments that don't need responding to, but keep your eye on that. But for now, I'll pass over to Nick, if that's okay.
Super. Yeah, thanks so much. I'll keep this brief because I'm really, really keen we maximise the questions. I'll just pop this up on full screen. Might be a moment. Okie doke. Hopefully that's displaying properly for everyone, which is super. Okay, thank you so much for having me. So huge thanks to Kevin, who is the absolute expert on the call today and can answer all of your technical questions, and an absolutely brilliant summary, I think, of the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan sort of development process that's happened over the last few years. So my name's Nick Chamberlain. I'm a regional engagement manager for the northwest of England for this new government agency called Active Travel England. And I thought I'd just give you a very short introduction to who we are for those of you who've not heard of us as an agency before. So I'm a central government civil servant. And I work for the Department for Transport, but I am connected to this new executive agency of the Department for Transport called Active Travel England. We were set up just over 2 years ago, so we celebrated our second birthday in August this year. We're a fairly small agency. We're less than 100 people, and we exist to try to accelerate a lot of the things that Kevin has been talking about. We were created under the last government in order to provide a specific support network and a support structure for local authorities. So that's why we exist. So one of the things that it's important to say is that Active Travel England is not a policy setting agency. So all policy around active travel and its use still sits with the Department for Transport, the policy teams there, and of course with Secretary of State and the ministers involved in that work. Active Travel England is a delivery agency, very similar to Network Rail or to National Highways, for those of you who have lots of experience and knowledge about wider transport infrastructure. We are there to provide practical support and to deliver the government policy of the day. Let me move on. Okay, so we have at the moment the same vision as an agency that is given to us by the Department for Transport, and this is the same currently under the new government as it was under the old one, and that's fairly simple and was expressed really well, I think, within the presentation Kevin's just given. The vision of the agency given to us by the Department of Transport is for everyone to have an attractive and safe choice to walk, wheel and cycle. And I think there's two bits in there that I'd like to touch on most. So firstly, it's about choice and giving people the option to choose to take an active journey rather than forcing people into that choice. And it's giving them choice through the delivery of a really world-class network and infrastructure. That's what we're talking about today through the LCWIP process. And the other thing that I think is really important that Kevin touched on as well is that we very much put that hierarchy of importance against walking, wheeling and then cycling. I think there has been a tendency over the first 2 years of our existence as an agency for us to be seen very much as a cycling agency, a cycling aim of government. But that is very much not the case. We are active travel in the round. And we very much are led by the fact that walking and wheeling often come first in many areas of consideration. This was very much the case under the previous government, and it is certainly the case under the current government that we have. As all of you as transport experts will be aware, the use and the quality of public transport is very much high on the government's transport agenda. And so active travel is very much seen as an enabler to helping people to make the choice to use public transport, in particular on more occasions. And so walking and wheeling very much sit there as high importance. We absolutely want to see high quality cycling infrastructure as well, but not at the expense of high quality walking and wheeling access for people to the destinations they want to get to. In terms of the new government, Kevin alluded to the very first cycling and walking investment strategy back in 2017. Our colleagues within Department for Transport working on the policy side are currently working on cycling and walking investment strategy number 3. So we've had number 2, which was fairly consistent. We've got number 3 now, and so there may be, under the new government and its choices, some subtle changes to how we express our job and our work, and we will be in discussions with Department for Transport on what that looks like over coming months, I'm quite sure. So just very briefly, some strategic priorities. So as I say, we are a delivery agency and we take our instruction from Department for Transport, and that comes down, from Secretary of State and ministers. But we're very much about investing in and improving the standards of the networks that are delivered for active travel across England. So as I say, we're a help agency. We are here to help and support local authorities, local highways authorities, local planning authorities to increase the quality of what we see delivered for walking, wheeling and cycling across the country. We're absolutely about working to support in integrating active travel in the planning system. So Active Travel England as an agency has been a statutory consultee in the planning system since June last year, so just over a year now. We don't have any powers under the planning system. We are very much there to advise and support and pass comment when developments come across our desks. So we're not like National Highways or to an extent Network Rail, where we don't have powers to stop anything from happening, but we're trying to work again in support and working with and through local planning officers when big development schemes come across our desk to advise and see how we can improve what is suggested by developers for walking, wheeling and cycling within them. We're very much about giving more people the opportunity to try active travel, and that means that we're working equally with some fairly small but quite targeted revenue funds to try and again support local authorities in their behaviour change activities. As a very small agency, we're quite limited in capacity, as you can imagine, so we're very reliant still on fantastic partners like Sustrans to help us deliver some of those works, and other existing charities like Living Streets, who many of you will have come across as well, a very pedestrian focused charitable organisation, and they help us to deliver on government objectives around giving people access to choice, again, to try things. One aspect that I think Kevin touched on through displaying that sort of collective piece of work that Sustrans have been working on to collect all that information about what LCWIPs exist across the country, we are very much tasked by the Department of Transport as an agency to better use data, to understand how active travel can be better planned, better integrated and better planned nationally, right across local authority and combined authority borders. So that is an enormously important part of why we exist as an agency. And again, we've got a fantastic working relationship starting to develop with our local government partners in how we do that better, which is very much a continuation, I think, of what Kevin touched on about why the LCWIP process was started in the first place. It was to bring some national consistency to how active travel networks were planned and then delivered across the country. Okay, let's whiz through the next few. We've got some corporate investment objectives. I don't think any of them are particularly surprising. I certainly won't go through all of them. I put up our website details at the start. All of this information is available publicly on our newly launched website. We had a separate sort of website launched last week, and I'll share the links with Gary again so that he can share it with all of you after the call. But needless to say, our objectives are government objectives, and again we are given those objectives by the Department for Transport when more strategic work has been done above us. We have a couple of really specific sort of specialist teams within Active Travel England. So although we're quite tiny as an agency, we have tried to focus a lot of our resource on particular specialist areas. So the first of those is our inspectorate, which is quite a harsh name, but in essence, it's a help and support agency, which is there to help both highways officers within local government and the consultancies that they work with. So we have a fantastic bunch of colleagues, around 20 of them, who are specialist transport planners, highways engineers, a lot of them coming from very different aspects of the profession, bringing lots of different skills with them. We have specialists in transport modelling. We have experts in particular areas of highways engineering or signals work. And their job basically is to support and work with local authorities when they send us their developing designs for particular schemes. Now, sometimes those schemes can be almost entirely active travel focused, and that might be a corridor scheme through a town or city where new cycling infrastructure is being put in, new pedestrian crossings are being put in, dangerous junctions might be being addressed. But a lot of the time, and increasingly, the designs we're seeing are maybe big bus projects, big bus corridors, and of course an enhancement and upgrade to the pedestrian, walking, wheeling, cycling facilities that are provided on that bus corridor or part of it. So we are one consultee that is being looked at, but we have various tools, one of which I shared, I think, after Ben made a comment in the chat earlier. We have a suite of tools that are being developed all the time, and they are there to help and support and advise. We are not an agency that a local highways authority ever has to get sort of approval from. We are there to support, help, and make comment on what they are doing and try to help the whole industry move forwards together. I think touching on there's various bits of government guidance out there, again, many of which are being developed and enhanced at the moment. Some of them we're being supported by Sustrans and others to improve currently. It won't surprise you that equality, diversity and inclusion remains hugely important under the new government, and there are always incredibly important conversations to be had all the time. A lot of the time, again, as an agency, we are there to support, help and enable local authorities to have these conversations with their local stakeholders. So again, we are very much there to help local government and advise them on the sorts of conversations they need to have. We're certainly not there to jump in front of them and dictate how things are done locally on the ground. We have, as I touched on before, a really important sort of digital data and analysis element to our work. And again, we're not there to dictate to local government how it does that, but we are there to pull local government together and to have a consistent discussion around how we can better use data and information to plan what we do, and specifically, as Kevin touched on before, to make sure that the investment that there is very targeted and going into absolutely the right places. And that will develop over coming years, I'm quite sure, if it remains a priority for the new government. So on to planning, which I touched on briefly before. As I say, we're one of the newest parts of the planning system, hugely important and a high topic of importance under the previous government, very much remains so under the new government as well. As I say, we have no powers under the planning system, but we are very busy. We have a small team of colleagues, about 15 people, who are powering through what they expect will be around 3,000 to 3,500 development applications a year. We have some thresholds above which we work. Below those thresholds, which you see here on the slide, we can advise depending on how strategically important they are. So I'll give you an example from my region in the northwest. We've got a housing development coming through just outside Windermere, and the Lake District National Park Authority were very, very keen to have our input. Normally it would just get a standard response for a smaller residential development, but because it's right outside Windermere. It's the gateway to an enormously busy national park, and because we were specifically asked by the national park for some support, we've given some specialist support to that development. But generally, we work to these sorts of thresholds, and these are the thresholds that have been given to us by the Department for Housing, Communities and Local Government. But it's a really interesting piece of work, and I wouldn't be at all surprised, given the importance on housing development in particular over coming years, to see that part of our role possibly be increased ever so slightly, and we might even get a little bit more capacity to support it. I know colleagues at the moment would really appreciate a few more heads within that team. They're very busy. Nearly there. Planning consultees, again, just a little bit more touching on that, but we're very open, and we have lots of ability for both private developers and for local government planning authorities to get in touch with us and ask for help. Some of that support is a little bit less specialist, coming from myself and my colleagues within our regional team. We have one regional manager per English region, but we do try and hook people into expert advice with our colleagues whenever we possibly can. Again, just on how we work, as I say, we are a small agency, less than 100 people for the whole country. We're not about sort of setting policy. That still sits with Department for Transport. We are very practical in how we try and support and help. And we are increasingly trying to work in a much more regional way. So the inspectorate that I touched on before, full of engineers and other specialist staff, and then our planning team, they will pick up work from wherever is most active across the country, but we are increasingly trying to put people into slightly more regional ways of working, because we know that as we develop those relationships, in particular with local authority officers, people always appreciate coming back to a known face and a known person. And that's me done. So I will stop sharing there, I think, Gary, and then move to questions.
Thank you, Nick. Very informative. I'm sure there'll be lots of people with thoughts and questions. I'm going to pass on to Martin. If anyone else does have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, either on the screen if your camera's on, or using the raise your hand icon, or post your questions in the chat as well. Over to Martin.
Thank you very much, and thanks Gary, thanks Nick, thanks Kevin. Really interesting to hear all of that. I've been thinking about the role of rail and the rail industry, and in particular community rail, and the interests of the people on this call as they're listening to your presentations. And thinking about from a strategic side of things, I'm very glad that Chris Morgan's posted that chart in the chat, which I think is really interesting. Dora and Totley. How do community groups, community rail partnerships, station friends groups, and anyone involved in linking the railway to the local area work to help prioritise interventions linking walking, wheeling, and cycling to the railway station as part of the plans? Obviously, we had a big list of kind of potential destinations. How do we make sure that the railway and links to the railway is important for the local area?
Do you want me to go first, Kevin, and then I'll leave you to provide the... So I think both of us have touched on, this is the choices for what the priorities are sit with the local authority. So again, I think for the community of people that we're chatting with today, which is wonderful, it is very much for all interest groups and stakeholder groups to engage wherever you possibly can with your local authority officers, be that public rights of way teams or the highways team. Increasingly within a lot of local authorities now, there is at least a person who will have a bit more of a role working specifically on active travel networks, certainly on the LCWIP programme that Kevin has alluded to. So again, we are there to help and advise, but those sorts of strategic decisions as to where the priorities sit, are very much still sat at a local level. Kevin, go ahead.
It's a great question, Martin, and echo Nick's thoughts around, speak to your local authority, the owner of the LCWIP in the first place. However, I do think this it points to something in the guidance which, when it was first put out there, as good as the guidance is, there are flaws in it. And I think one of the biggest flaws is it talks about a 10-year plan, right? The LSWIP is meant to be a 10-year plan, a long-term plan. What it doesn't reference is how often these plans should be reviewed and refreshed, which I would suggest the local authority should be looking at their LSWIP sort of every 2 to 3 years and refreshing it, because, you know, we saw in 2021 priorities can change in places quite quickly. When pre-COVID, there was places where we thought, oh, we'll never manage to fit a cycle lane down there, and then, you know, post 2021, it's like, oh, actually, maybe we do have space now, you know. So things change, and I think local authorities do need to review their LSWIPs, even if they're completed and adopted. They should be, you know, reviewed and refreshed. I think it's a push on a local authority to, if you're not on the map, if your rail stations are not on a map, why are they not on a map? Because they're clearly going to be big trip generators, right? And they'll clearly be a big key attractor for walking trips, as I think Chris rightly pointed out, you know. And it's the stuff that we should, LSWIPs should be becoming more nuanced and be able to develop that level of kind of being a bit more fine-grained in terms of the type of interventions that are available, that need to be implemented. Yeah, I could keep going on about this, but I think I'm hoping that answers the question.
Thank you. Yeah.
So just as an extension to that then, Kevin and Nick, if you were to offer like 3 takeaway actions that the members in this room or watching the video after could take if they're not currently involved in the LCWIP, what would you suggest those actions would be?
You've put us on the spot there, Gary.
Sorry, Kev.
This one.
If I got you started,
that's all right. That's all right.
I'll contextualise this myself. So I'm down in Devon. South Hams Council have just put their first LCWIP to public consultation. In fact, for interest, I'll post a link to it. There's a website at the moment where you'll see the thought process. I would imagine that would be a good place for our members to start looking, just to go on to Google, see what's out there, see what exists, what sort of stage of developments it's at, and familiarise themselves with what's out there. Once they've done that, to reach out to local authority person in control of the LCWIP and say, can we discuss? Would that be a good course of action?
I'm always, sorry, Kevin, I'm always a huge fan of engaging with your local elected members wherever you possibly can. I don't know if any of you are local councillors on the call today. I think they're an amazing army of people. And I do think that if you're working, as so many of you are, around a particular station or a particular line or route, you will have great links already, I'm quite sure, into local councillors. And they're often a really good place to start, especially if you have someone who is a portfolio holder around rights of way or highways or transport issues. They will be talking to the local authority highways and rights of way teams on a regular basis. And they're often a really good place, I think, for community groups, community activists to start with. Make your introduction into the local authority officer team through an elected member, especially if you know of elected members who are very passionate and keen about some of the things that you are keen about. I think it gives a better quality of conversation sometimes if you have that introduction made for you. Kevin, over to you.
No. Good answer, Nick. I think to follow up, Gary, it would be first protocol, a little bit of desktop research to see what exists locally in terms of an LSWIP, whether it be in your local authority or county council or whatnot. Second protocol, as Nick rightly points out, make connection, be it through a councillor or officer. Third protocol, offer to get involved, to be a stakeholder voice that can offer up support, whether it be providing them with additional data, providing them with qualitative kind of stories, about why, if your stations are not included in future plans, why not, and why should they be, really? But basically to put yourself around the table at that stakeholder engagement phase, because even though a lot of LSWIPs will have already been adopted by a number of local authorities, we're also at that kind of cycle now where they are being refreshed again. They're being, re-looked at, and there's a renewed impetus around them with the introduction of Active Travel England. So get a seat around the table, I would say, as a stakeholder.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Nick. I see Caroline's posted in the chat that Lancashire County Council have reached out directly to the Community Rail Partnership, which is great. Caroline, I don't know if you're able to elaborate on that, but through what route did that come about?
Hi there. I think we've got good connections with Lancashire County Council, and so they just got in touch with us and let us know. So I think we have quite a good relationship with the active travel. So I think we were just lucky that we had people in our organisation that perhaps they knew and knew they could reach out to, and that we'd be obviously keen. And of course, the rail network round Lancashire, along with the other routes and the canals and everything, are really vital within our area. They're not, as I explained, they're not always the most direct routes, but there's definitely in Pendle, in various, the number of borough councils that we currently have in Lancashire, there's a real desire to see those connections work, and where there's a useful bit of maybe a canal, but it sometimes then goes off in a completely different way because life's changed, and where the connections are needed vary, don't they, and change over time. So yeah, I really feel I see that trying to make that work. It's resources, isn't it, and practicality, but having that map is a great start, I would say.
I think that's wonderful. Sorry, Gary, I was just going to say, Caroline, it's absolutely fantastic that the team at Lancashire have been in touch. It's on my patch, of course, and I really rate the county team very highly. They've got some brilliant people within it who are very, very passionate, very knowledgeable, and are trying really, really hard, I think, with what is a very complex transport network, isn't it, across the county? I think that's fair to say. I'm not saying that anywhere in the country isn't, but Lancashire has some challenges. I think on the canal network in particular, as Kevin said earlier, I think our job as an agency, Kevin, when colleagues from Sustrans were advising, we're always saying, again, where appropriate, absolutely, it's this wonderful resource. But it shouldn't be a matter of sort of shoehorning an active travel route onto it just for the sake of it, if it isn't taking people where they need to go. And certainly some work I've been doing with the team in Lancashire and the team at Lancaster City Council recently on some of the the big housing development up to the north of the city. I think the developer there, of course, was quite keen to just say, we've done cycling and walking, it's right next to the canal, everyone can just go down there. Now, of course, that comes with some real challenges because canals are very narrow, they're massively important heritage and nature assets, there's limits to what you can do, and equally they're critically important green routes and leisure areas, as you know. So sort of having lots and lots of people using them as peak time, commuter routes or whatever, isn't necessarily the best thing for the community. So it's a balance all the time, but it's absolutely fantastic to hear that you're involved, and real credit to the county team for getting in touch.
And can I just make one other comment, is that it's also not just within your area, it's making those meaningful links into like Merseyside, like we do on the railways, or trying to get the public transport, the buses going at times to link in with everything. It's that's important, because not just everybody wants to stop when they get to the end of a county line.
It's a wonderful point, well made, Caroline. Couldn't agree more.
Thanks, everyone. So just got a couple more minutes left. I can't see any more questions in the chat. Excuse me if I've missed any. Last opportunity to raise your hand if you did have a question. I see Steve down in Purbeck. What would you like to ask?
Yeah, I'm really quite interested to hear all the conversation today on active travel. Just wanted to add something about working with your local authority. I mean, that is a key link. I mean, in community rail, we work with lots of stakeholders and partners, and we have to make the difference between linking sustainable travel. That's what we're all about, really, making those links from the train stations to buses or cycling or walking. But there's another route as well. There's local transport action groups, and they have an influence with a local authority. So it's working with those. And in our case, we've got some very good active travel groups that are partners within the local authority and the transport planning team. So we're able to input into local transport plan, which is quite useful. And the National Trust is a big landowner for us as well. So they have a massive role in active travel to be able to protect the landscape that they're there to do. So there's all those links as well, really.
Thank you, Steve. Input very much appreciated. Got a couple more hands raised, so we'll go to Linda and then Thomas, and then it'll be time to finish. Over to you, Linda.
With regards to working with the local LCWIP, we're Sheppey Light Railway Greenway Group on the Isle of Sheppey, and we are currently inputting into the local walking and cycling plan. As I've intimated before, the big problem is to link one end of the island to the other, but also to the railway station, and it's really quite important to get our routes that actually feed in, and because we've got two main routes around Sheppey, and both of them are overused. There's great amount of building going on, and there needs to be a long-term policy to connect all the areas, not just the main conurbations, because we're also a big tourist area. So connecting with the railway stations is really important. And how we do it, we do need help from the railway authorities.
Thank you, Linda. A very valid point, and it's good to hear that you are involved. And if we can support you in any other way, then just get in touch afterwards, and we'll do our best. Thank you, Linda. Thomas.
Hi. A slight nuance when in dealing with local authorities, where you've got two tiers of authority, like typically county and district. You'll often find that you've got a very sort of highways, maybe rights of way perspective at the county level. But then when you come down to things like planning, that's down at the district and borough level. So, I work for a borough, and we've adopted the LCWIP into our planning, and we were very keen that, we won't be missing opportunities in the weeds with individual developments. And that's one of the reasons we're getting updates, which are happening almost, every month on our LCWIP, is because on the ground, new developments are creating new opportunities, and we're desperately trying to make sure we don't close any routes down that are in the LCWIP. County, of course, are looking far more at strategic, bidding to Active Travel England to get the funding to really do the longer routes. But getting all the local stuff connected in and picking up those opportunities and those little gaps and getting rid of the little gaps really works with the planning authority a lot more.
Thank you, Thomas. So, Martin, just before we finish, any final words before I say thank yous?
No, do we have a final opportunity to reflect on your question, Gary, about 3 points to
yes,
for people to take away?
Any suggestions, Martin, yourself?
No, I was thinking, do you think, Nick and Kevin, you wanted a little more time to think about that question?
Yeah,
and whether we sufficiently covered it?
I think it's sufficiently covered, Martin. I think my 3 would be, if you're not already involved, it's a quick desktop search to find out what's happening locally. Second stop would be communication with local authority. I think Nick's suggestion of doing it via an elected member is a wonderful one to gain some traction. And then the third one is to, get yourself around the table as an actual stakeholder who can start to influence, and that kind of prioritization schedule, really. That would be 3 from me.
Great. What I was also thinking about alongside that to support those 3 things is what evidence you can gather and present yourselves in the way that we've just had, and I put a comment about this in the chat as well, about Dore and Totley. That's demonstrating that there's a clear kind of mismatch in the way people are travelling at the moment to use the station. It doesn't suit the local area, so there's clearly some work to be done there, and it's quite simple to demonstrate that with a piece of evidence like that. If local groups can do that in their local area, I think it's potentially quite powerful. That's one thing I would add. So yeah, I'm happy, Gary.
Thank you, Martin. Thanks. Well, in the interest of finishing on time, I think we'll call it a day there. Once again, thank you so much to Kevin and Nick for your expertise, sharing them with us today, and your time and enthusiasm. It's very much appreciated. This video will be made available online, hopefully in the next 24 hours. So if you want to share the link with colleagues to watch, then please feel free to do that. And other than that, keep an eye on future events coming up. Do get in touch with me if I can be of any other help. And for now, wish you an enjoyable rest of the day. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Gary.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.